seconds to record the cloud. Okay. Ha-ha! Okay, we are up and running. So good morning, everybody. We are here at the Energy for All Alaska Task Force meeting. I believe the date is May 21st, 2019. Our subject today is air quality. Department of Environmental Conservation recently released the Serious SIP for Fairbanks. So we have with us Ms. Cindy Heil. Ms. Heil is Program Manager for the Non-Point and Mobile Sources, ANPMS, within Division of Air Quality, and is responsible for the development of the state implementation plans, SIPs, around the state. Cindy has worked her entire career with DEC and is completing her 29th year in the Air Quality Division, where she originally started as a college intern. I have a new intern. Let's see, Cindy has lived in Alaska for over 43 consecutive years. She received her Bachelor of Science in Natural Sciences and Master of Science in Environmental Quality at UAA. Seawolf?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, Ms. Heil is actually here to give us a presentation again, give us a walkthrough of the Serious SIP using the website as the basis. So I think we'll do some walking around the website so you know where to find things. We'll do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the SIP recommendations and calls for action, and then you'll be able to ask questions throughout. All right. So Ms. Heil, it's all on you.
All right. So I'm not sure, is anybody there who heard any of the presentations earlier last week?
Several.
Yeah, we're getting double dose.
Double, triple dose. Well, the intent with this one is not to repeat too much of what you've already heard in the sense, but to dive into more detail of if you haven't read anything yet. So hopefully that will be helpful. So this is the web pages. If you've never been to our DEC's air quality pages, I'm going to take just a few minutes to show you how this works. So if you go to DEC, alaska.gov/air is really the fastest. Here's our division webpage. We have it under hot topics. But one of the things we also did is we put a little link right here for Fairbanks PM 2.5. So even if we recycle these hot topics and put them into previous hot topics. But if you always, for Fairbanks, you guys are special. You can have a quick link right there. This is our clearinghouse for everything Fairbanks. You can have the SIP, you can have what our current regulations are, SIP planning, current air quality conditions, all the forecasting, all the projects we've done, outreach, again, hot topics. Our statewide complaint form is here. So if you need want to issue, file a complaint, that's the best way to do it electronically. Here's the boundaries maps. You can get to the regulations by always coming here. So here's proposed. We're going to go here next. But if you ever want to see all the previous proposed regulations we've done for this community, they can be found there. So here's where we are. This is actually going to be updated tomorrow. We're getting ready to issue a supplemental notice. It's not going to change any of the hearing dates or the open houses or the close of comment period, but we had 5 figures, 3 tables, and a little bit of discussion on one appendix document that we couldn't get it finished by the 10th of May when we signed the original public notice. So that's all finished, and we're filing things up, and that'll be published tomorrow. So here on this page, we'll always have, yes?
Before we jump any further, may I ask one question of the group? Is there anyone who doesn't know what the area boundary is for our air quality? Okay, no, looks like everybody's up to speed. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. We always post our actual public notices. Supplemental, we write under here. This is what the actual regulations look like. I would highly recommend that any of the summaries we have is helpful, but you should actually look at the real legal language, and this is what it looks like. So we're just going to show you, but the SIP, if you haven't seen that, is a very large very large document. We have some help documents here. This is helping with the economics evaluations that we've done. We've laid it out, each chapter and each appendix document. So this document 07, which has all the backed information, we're going to be breaking that up. Right now, this is a zip file, and it's 2,307 pages. We have reference documents. This can be really helpful if you ever want to see when you're looking at our regulations. This has all the CFRs. So any CFRs that are in are referenced in our regulations, you can find a copy here. The only thing that's not here with regard to reference material in our regulations are things that may be what's the word I'm looking for? When you can't copy because it's got a restriction on it. So,
CFR.
Yeah, CFR. I mean, there's certain things like trade associations like ASTMs. You can't copy it unless you buy it. So those documents are in our offices if anybody wants to come and take a peek at them.
Kyle, for acronyms, can we, at least the first time, can we say the name in full? Like, what is a CFR?
Oh, I'm sorry. Code of Federal Register.
Okay.
So questions and answers. If anybody wants to ask a question, any question that's submitted through here will be answered and posted before the end of the comment period. So that's a method that allows you to put as many questions as you want to. So we put them all together and then they'll be posting. We'll probably be starting to post questions that we get in here in the next couple weeks. So we have a number of questions that we already have answered, the hard ones that we think are most common. We also have all the questions and answers that we received from the last few regulation processes that we've done in Fairbanks. So some of these questions may not be quite correct at this point because time has passed, but at the time that these questions and answers were written, they were current at the time. But we wanted to make sure people had the information at their fingertips from what we've done in the past. And then we're highly recommending people submit their comments electronically, if possible. There's your thing. So this is broken up, so you can comment on the SIP. You can comment on each section of the regulations if you choose. You don't have to. You can comment on general overall or general public process. This allows you to attach a file, pictures, and when you submit it, it gives you a receipt and it gives you all of a copy of everything that you submitted. So you have it in your back pocket if you ever want to have a record. Then we have all these help documents. So this is an outline of the serious SIP. So if you want to kind of find where, the sections that you might be really interested in, these are each of the chapters or the sections that I showed you. And then this is all the subsections. So it goes into where all the details are. And then you can see, like, if you wanted to go to section 7 of the control measures, there's there's more detail. Like if the stakeholder recommendations, how do we do that? There's all these discussions right here. So what I'm gonna, we have the BACT, we have the cost analysis for fuel switching, the waivers. If we have time, I'll go over that. The infographic that the borough developed, and then a handout on the 5 different ways you can comment. This is, our preferred, but there's 4 other ways you can comment. We also are all putting our any formal presentation. So the assembly presentation that we gave on Thursday night to their work session, that's already loaded. And the chamber presentation that was done at lunchtime is loaded here. So I'm going to go over any questions at this point where I go over the regulation summary.
The question about on your comment form, it refers to specific sections of the Alaska Administrative Code, correct?
Yes.
And
It's what it is here's your regulations. Oh,
right.
let's see, this is already open. So 50075E. So 075 would be in the comment section 075 related to visible emissions. So this is what you'd be commenting on, is this change right here. If you wanted to comment by section. And then here's another item by section.
So it'd be anything with water 575 section.
Right. And then here's 076, which has to do with the wood cellars. So the way the comment section is broken up by regulation section if you want to comment on something very specific, or you can do an overall.
Yeah.
Did that make sense? Okay.
It does.
So this is, like a cheat sheet. It's a crosswalk. This is in the SIP. This is a table we've pulled out to make it easier for people to find things. This crosswalks the stakeholder recommendations and the best available control measure, BACM, numbers. So when we released the preliminary draft documents back in March of 2018, that analysis had about 47 different control measures, because best available control measures, we have to look at every other community in the United States, and we have to pull all the different possible control measures and analyze them, and then say either we have to use them or we have to find a technologically or economically supported defensible reason why we're not doing it. So you'll see that this registration requirements was the #1 stakeholder recommendation. Plus, there was 7 different communities or different regulations within the BACM that we found nationally that also has to do with registration. So these are the areas in the regs that this pertains that we put it in. And so here's all the different types of registration requirements. We couldn't do a full across the board, require everyone to register everything like the stakeholder recommendation. So what we've done is we've put in registration wherever we have the ability to do so. We don't have taxes to give you a tax credit for registering a device, for example, which is what the stakeholder recommendation was. But we can require vendors who sell wood-fired heating devices to provide us registration information. There's need to also provide curtailment information and operating instructions, real estate transactions, issuance of waivers, participation in the burn right program, or any kind of wood stove change out or conversion program. We'll be collecting registration information as proposed. Then we have the fuel requirements. Again, the stakeholder recommendation, all the BACM numbers. Now these BACM documents in detail, you can find in the control measure appendix, is the full BACM analysis. So that analysis is pretty big. It lists out the community it came from. It lists out a link to that page. You can see the actual regulations in the other community. It has a description and then an analysis, and then our justification for either dismissing it or including it. So as you can see, yes.
I have a question I've been wanting to ask regarding the BACM or the BACM items. They get on the list simply having been adopted as part of an implementation plan in another community, or is there any assessment of their effectiveness?
It's just have to be adopted.
Okay.
And we use yes,
measures by having been adopted as a measure, not necessarily because there was some analysis of how effective it was.
That's correct.
The issue the community had.
We try to use effectiveness in the sense that you know, we tried on some things that says this doesn't make sense. It's not going to do very much. And that we got that shot down. Some of that kind of uh, um, justification was used in the preliminary drafts, and EPA came back and said you can't do it that way. So we had to do quite a bit of rewriting on some of this and find more information to discount items, or we've had to put them in because we weren't able to justify it. But we tried that argument. We tried that argument about effectiveness.
So I guess that answers another question I've had is that this is already the product of a bit of an iterative process between the community, DEC, and the EPA.
That's correct. The March 18th was preliminary drafts were somewhat unprecedented. You usually don't see that large of material released in a draft format for people to just get comments. But we were trying really hard, not necessarily get comments, but to get additional data. We didn't get much of any data from the general public. We got we have quite a bit of information from the point sources. But EPA gave us a lot of comments, very detailed comments. Those can be found, I believe, on the stakeholders webpage, because we gave it to them and we said, you know, had them help trying to figure out how to handle some of the comments that EPA came back with. But yes, absolutely, there's a reiterative process. And we're still looking for information. If you heard the commissioner speak last week, we need data. And to be frank, we can't, many people might say, well, we don't like this, we don't want to do it, this is going to hurt me, but without, you know, a copy of somebody's heating bill, redacted out the personal information that shows an actual impact. EPA doesn't listen to, you know, I don't like this or this is going to hurt me. They want to see actual factual proof. So again, we're still looking for data. We're still trying to get information if it's out there and available. We have we talked to a couple of the coffee roasters last week, and we actually have started getting data. We think that we might be able to take some of that out, or we might be able to put a limit to like a threshold, so anything below this limit wouldn't be required to have any kind of extra control measure put on, and anything above could, right? So we've been starting to collect some really good information. So this is the dry wood. This section right here is on fuel requirements, is the switch. And if anybody hasn't heard us comment about the fuel switching, there is a market share issue. We have Marathon, which used to be Endeavor, which used to be Tesoro, can't supply, they've told us, diesel number 1 in 90 days, and they feel that they can be competitive. But PetroStar needs longer to put it in because they don't have the storage. I think it's the storage. So what this means is we looked at this from an air quality perspective. We need a diesel switch in 2020 to take credit for that, to help us with our next plan. So we just picked a date right in the middle of 2020. I'm expecting that we're going to get comments on this date, and with the request to move it one way or the other. It'll be interesting to see what information we have. But right now, we are proposing not to affect this winter, but the following winter. But there is going to be an interesting set of comments that are coming in from the refiners.
We do have a question.
So,
Yes.
Cindy, Rick Soley, so just to understand that a little more, if with a July 2020 date, I had understood, or maybe I just inferred, that PetroStar would have the time and the resources to construct storage. Is that correct, or are you getting mixed signals from them, or you don't have a full signal? And is it
We
that
don't. We
there's-
were told they needed time, but we didn't really get a very good date. So we had to pick a date to put in the regs, and we're taking comment on that date. And I'm expecting that we'll get comments on that date. And I just want to give you guys a sense of there's a broad spectrum of where that date may land at this point.
Sure. I mean, I understand that. I guess given that the regulations would be final later this fall, or actually there should be reasonable time to adopt something, but maybe not. That is of concern to us. The Chamber has long been concerned about the market impacts to fuel switching, and it was the big reason why we were so opposed to ULSD. That and the cost difference.
Right.
Well, this is a little different though.
This is a few cents difference on the price, and it's
That's not what I
timing.
mean. I would be concerned if we implemented a regulation that put our local refinery at a competitive disadvantage against out of town refinery.
Well, that was with ULSD, it was even more so because Petrostar didn't have that ability at all. In this case, it's more of a storage issue. They do produce it. So, okay, thanks.
And
Okay.
they round up to 55 gallons.
So they just needed as much time as we could give them. It's kind of what when we talked to them was. There wasn't any date certain that they could be done by, so we put in a date right in the middle of the year, and then we're going to take comments on it.
Cindy, did you look at ultra low sulfur diesel?
Yes, we did.
And
They did. We had UAF do an economic analysis, and it was estimated to be 30 to 40 cents per gallon more by doing ULSD, and we are finding that is economically infeasible to go to ULSD at this time.
thank you.
And that is the BACM requirement. That is what they use in lower 48. So that is the best available control measure for this particular type of requirement. So we're proposing as a compromise to go to diesel 1 as the BACM for us because the other is just too expensive.
Well, and the other thing, Mike, is that as we were just talking about, that was not able to be provided locally, and so it would create a significant market disruption as far as the refiners and who's providing that fuel. So that was one of the major concerns of the Chamber of Commerce, that you're going to change the market, you're going to increase costs, which obviously will hurt the town economically and arguably switch more people into wood burning, which is not what we're attempting to do. So we appreciate that the department is looking at fuel number 1 and trying to find a way to implement this that doesn't have a market disruption.
Mr. Sheets?
I just need a little bit of an education. So switching over to number 1, we reduce our PM 2.5 issue because the precursors that are eliminated.
Sulfur.
Lower sulfur, and is it the same BTU content, or is it a lower BTU content as number 2?
Did you hear the question, Ms. Heil?
Yes, it's slightly lower BTUs, but then you don't have the maintenance issues. So because it doesn't clog things up.
Cleaner burning.
It's cleaner burning. So what happens is that we have direct PM 2.5, but we also have about 20% of our filter has sulfur sulfates, which comes from sulfur. So sulfur, we have to deal with sulfur because as a precursor, it's a significant amount on the filter. So we know that it's there. So we know we have to do a sulfur control, and diesel number 1 seems to be the most practical and economical.
So it has significantly less sulfur, but it still has some sulfur, but you're still burning more of it because it's a lower BTU content. So I wonder
they did that analysis, and they overall the numbers are slight. It's not like you're still going to get a overall reduction in sulfur.
And I mean, didn't I, for a relative scale, didn't I see that the additional cost expected to a homeowner was $30 or $70 a year or something?
Well,
So
it's an average. Yeah, it's about 70 for the
Gives you an
average
idea
house.
of how much
Yeah.
more
70.
is actually burning.
For number one,
And
it would have
it's a
been
fairly
thousands
substantial
for,
drop.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
thousands for
ULSC was,
What are,
LULS.
what are the hospital bills adding up to as we hesitate cleaning our air?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Just wondering what the hospital bills are adding up to while we're not cleaning up the air.
Well, it could be substantial from what you hear about people who are having to go to the hospitals. So we also put another due date on the for dry wood cells. This is about 2 years after we hope the regulations are adopted, to try to give enough time to the commercial wood sellers to come up with how they want to do their own business practices in meeting this requirement. So we also put in very specific requirements on how do you get to be dry. And so we're saying it has to be properly seasoned, split, and stored covered for at least 9 months prior to being sold, or it has to be mechanically dried, and we have to inspect it and approve it, or it has to be harvested from an inspected fire-killed source that has been split, stacked, stored, and confirmed dry prior to freezing. So in essence, it's really not allowing cutting and splitting after it's frozen. We want everything done before it's frozen so that in the wintertime, there's not, it's very difficult to measure the moisture content of frozen wood. So if we know that it's dry before it's frozen, that we think that's the best way for the community. Again, this is all open for public comment.
What's a non-commercial wood seller? Like more like incidental sales?
Yeah, Craigslist on the corner. Someone grabs it and shows up on the corner. It's very difficult to enforce, but it does give us a tool. Should we find someone, we do call all the Craigslist sellers, and if they meet the commercial regulations, they're supposed to, we call them, are they registered? We have all the commercial wood sellers registered already. So we know what, and they have to provide the moisture content to those people they sell wood to. So we know what our average moisture content is. We know how much wood is sold, at least commercially by, reputable wood sellers. I'm expecting to get comments from people who have wood on their own property that they might cut and then offer for sale. We'll have to deal with those issues. But right now we're focusing on commercial. If you notice, non-commercial wood cells may not dry wood. This is a backroom requirement. So we're also trying to get the public record built up.
Cindy had some discussion yesterday in our air quality coalition about commercial wood providers that provide wood to folks that store it. They have on-site storage, they have adequate shed space, and they get it as it's green wood and they let it dry. And so one challenge would be with the regulations written as they are, these sellers couldn't provide wood to responsible burners that dry their wood. That's a nuance in the regulations that I know what we're trying to prevent, and yet these are the responsible burners that you're trying to create a process to efficiently get them wood. And so
I would recommend that you look at 31 and 32, and if you can come up with a way that can be how we could regulate it, provide comments to that.
Okay.
We only have so many tools in our toolbox, and it's much easier to just have than to try to have a lot of exceptions. And then how do you enforce that? How do you ensure that? How do you determine someone who is, the more you have, the more loopholes you have, and the more ways you have for people to exploit those. So,
understand.
yeah, I mean, it's great, come up with ideas, but I mean, really try to put some thought into how we would enforce it, and how you could differentiate between a good burner and somebody who doesn't. So if For example, if you had somebody who was in the dry wood, the burn right program, and you weren't afraid to have someone come inspect your wood pile, I think that would be something that we could work with people. But most people don't want you to come look. But if you like what you do and you're proud of what you do, we are setting up the voluntary burn right program to recognize and identify those who wish to show that they do have it and are willing to be inspected. So it could be we could also leverage that program as part of what you've just brought up.
Thank you.
Ms. Heil, on the non-commercial wood sellers line, where it says non-commercial sellers may only sell dry wood, are we defining dry wood the same as above, with covered for at least 9 months, mechanically dried, etc.?
Dry wood in the regulations is defined as less than 20%.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Heil.
Oh, you're welcome. So another date we have in here, and you'll see this is a big one. This is one of those items that's kind of like, if you don't have it, we might not be approvable by EPA. This is the date certain removal of EPA uncertified devices. And we're including all outdoor hydronic heaters as well, except if they're pellet fueled. So all these have to be removed or replaced by December 31st, 2024. They have to be, or if they're part of being sold or conveyed by an existing building, those can be earlier, whatever's the earliest. That's already happening, actually. It was our last is moderate SIPs contingency measure that we triggered, that if a device is part of a building being sold and it's uncertified, it has to be removed or replaced. So that piece is already there, but now it's all devices regardless. So that date's in there. We're going to get pushback from EPA because we've pushed it out beyond the best available control measure due date. So BACM and BACT, best available control technologies, they're supposed to be completely or partially implemented before 4 years after you were reclassed as a serious area. So that date is June 9th, 2021. So to really meet BACM and BACT, we're supposed to have everything in place before June 9th, 2021. But we're saying that because it's partial, you have that, in the rule you have this little language, partial or fully. And because we're already removing uncertified stoves, we're saying that's partial. We're partially doing this already so that we meet in essence of the BACM requirements. But I'm not going to be surprised if they don't want us to push this forward. We have put it in the SIP that the reason we're not inclined to move it forward is we want to make sure we don't overwhelm the wood stove changeout programs, which is what we're expecting people to want to be able to use to help them with this meeting this requirement, and they can only handle so many at a time per year. So that's one of the reasons why we've pushed it out, and to give people plenty of time for planning.
Yeah, Cindy, this is Gary Newman. I'm on the phone too, so I was wondering if I could ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
There apparently is still a wood stove replacement program.
Yes.
But what I see in the regulations is that they're really focusing on catalytic stoves. And
yes.
I'm wondering if there's been any study because of their effectiveness after they've been in a while, because they get really easily contaminated from colored newsprint and if you're burning other items in there. And I don't know if there's been any studies done on effectiveness of stoves afterwards, which gets
well, there's according to the for catalyst devices, where people really need to look at their manufacturer recommendations, and the catalyst is supposed to last for 2 to 3 years by federal rule. Of course, if they contaminate or mess up, but catalyst stoves do require maintenance in order to be completely effective.
So how are we ensuring that? Because if we could put a bunch of them in and if they don't work, then we're not solving the problem.
Right. So that is, if you want waivers or anything, they'll need to have some inspection at some point.
Yeah.
So we're
And-
trying to include inspections. We're trying to include professionally installed, professionally sized. We're trying to get wood sweep, chimney sweeps requirements in there. So we're trying to do the best we can to address that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and in terms of I guess really the DEC doesn't have citation authority, which
That's correct.
so is that in the works to be
That
legislated at
is
some point?
that has to come from the legislature.
Right, but the request presumably would come from a recommendation like I would expect to see in this plan.
That's that has come from the legislature.
Okay.
That's all I can say about that. I know that there's been people in the community that have been trying to get from the legislature to work on that, and I don't think they've been successful yet.
All right, and the last question for right now, if I might, can you clarify the priorities for implementation of the more critical local areas, you know, the burn restriction zones, as opposed to the larger non-attainment area?
So right now, all of our everything is proposed for the entire non-attainment area. It's more defensible with EPA. If we get comments that suggest or recommend that some of these devices start out in a smaller area or in like a specific zone, I think, I mean, that should be commented on. You
Okay.
know, it's much harder to go from big to little, but it's much easier to go from little to big, if that makes sense. We can't
Okay.
go back. We can't go backsliding. So, one of the comments that we did get from EPA earlier is that, you know, we get them all the time. Was this for the whole area? This should be for the whole area, because EPA looks at the entire non-attainment area. We did break the, we did establish 3 different zones. That's to help us with calling alerts, so we can focus on different areas, but we could apply those to control measures as well.
Okay. All right. I'll hold other questions for now. Thank you.
So most of the regulations that are from here down on wood stoves are existing regulations with some slight adjustments. First of all, this is a new one. No outdoor hydronic heaters may be sold or installed unless pellet fueled. That's a definite backup that's happening to other areas. You know, the city of Fairbanks has already has outdoor hydronic heaters are prohibited. This just expands that. We dropped the standard to the EPA Phase 2 Step 2 standard. Those EPA regulations go into effect May 2020. So we're just going to be just a couple months earlier, but it's more efficient to put them in now than to try to do another regulation update. So these were also the levels that are in the terms and conditions of the wood stove changeout program money that we got from EPA. So the 0.1 pounds per million BTUs for pellet stoves, the 2.0 gram per hour for catalyst and wood stoves, non-catalyst stoves. So that's the only thing we changed with those, is we dropped that number. So we're going from a 2.5 to 2.0. We did, for non-catalyst stoves, we have added another requirement. Right now, when we start out of the gate, we won't have DEC listed devices that allow catalyst, but manufacturers can bring in their EPA certification with what is called a TEOM emission profile that is approved by DEC. What we have found is that the northeastern states have a mandate to increase their use of biofuel twofold, threefold, I mean, huge. But at the same time, they don't want to decrease their air quality. So they have put $4 million into developing and testing cordwood tests for devices. And they came up with the standard operating procedures that we've incorporated in our regulations, where a continuous emissions monitor is used during the certification test. So it shows where emissions are uncontrolled. And what's happening, what is being found is that the EPA test method is so long that the averaging of that method allows non-catalyst stoves to meet the standards that EPA has set. But that's not going to do us any good here in Fairbanks. So we're asking for the emission profiles to show that these non-catalysts can address those emissions, and if they can, absolutely put it on our list and allow them to be sold in the Fairbanks area. The rest of these are all existing regulations, just renumbered. We have put in regulations requiring wood heating fire devices, wood-fired retrofit control devices be professionally sized and professionally installed with confirmation, certified installers, and devices removed or replaced. These are all background requirements, specifically in addition to the stakeholder requirement. We're also saying that no new construction for wood-only heat, except if you're a dry cabin on a very large parcel, and then for new rentals or rentals that haven't already been grandfathered in with a previous no ash. We're trying to get out of wood-only heat. And then,
Is there anyone that you know of who actually does stack testing, like you described above?
So stack testing, or are you talking about certification of wood stoves? Or are you talking about in situ at the house stack test?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about wood stoves.
Okay.
You have a wood stove. Is there really, since it all comes down to the amount of effluents, grams per hour? I think it was two grams per hour.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anywhere here in town or any outfit in town that you know of or in the state that does that kind of testing?
So the
so that you can be able to say, my wood stove, it might be a little older, but it's meeting the standard. I shouldn't have to remove it, that kind of thing. I'm just wondering if that kind of
well, the 2.0 grams per hour is on new stoves. It's not on the in situ stoves because they don't compare. I'm not sure if you're aware of, but EPA certifies stoves currently on what's called cribwood, which is dimensional rubber that you buy at the Lowe's kind of thing. And they put it in these very special little stacks within the wood stove. And all the wood stoves nowadays are tuned to pass that test. So it's very dry in a laboratory. So we're saying the 2.0 grams per hour are for new devices that are being certified. That's their certification standard. What you're suggesting is we don't have regulations to that for that per se. That would be something else, and source tests are very expensive. So there is a way to do that in the coal if they can show that in a source test for like commercial grade coal-fired devices would need to have a source test. But for home, no. Once it's in, it's in. But if you want waivers, then what we look at is the age of the device, the type of device, and what the rating was when it was originally sold.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So coal devices, in essence, there would be no new coal devices are allowed to be sold. Our current regulations allow if it's EPA certified or borough listed. Borough doesn't have a program and EPA doesn't certify coal. So in essence, there's no new coal devices will be allowed residentially in the area. And then all existing coal-fired devices will need to be removed or replaced by December 31st, 2024, or if they're part of a cell. So there is some changes to the curtailments and operations. So originally, we call it curtailment, and we'd like everybody to stop feeding it at that point in time. Well, back in 42 and EPA want that to be clarified. So we've proposed that there would be a new 75E3, which pretty much says in the announcement that all the smoke must cease within 3 hours of the announcement. So that gives you a time frame of when you need to have the visual emissions stopped. We also incorporated the Fairbanks ordinance language that has since been removed, but you've heard Nick talk about this is a very effective way of doing enforcement for visible emissions, and that is they won't cross property lines. We are next proposing to drop the thresholds by 5 micrograms per cubic meter. Right now, we call this at 25 and this one at 35. Well, the standard's at 35. We've been getting a lot of pushback besides the BACA measure that if you're supposed to be protecting public health, why would you call a stage restriction when you've already exceeded the standard? So we're dropping that. There's also a new, the Sirius SIP that just came out in San Joaquin Valley. They have a really low threshold. They're actually down to 12. So we turned the advisory down to 15 to get everybody's attention. They're using it, but because it isn't codified, it isn't an adopted regulation yet, we didn't put it in for that measure. And their measure is when it hits 12, you have to be registered in order to continue burning. And then you would have your normal stages where if you're registered and you had a stage 1, you could go stage 1. And if you were registered and it hit a stage 2 if you were no ash. So they are really restrictive. But we got our SIP out before their SIP was finalized. So we'll probably not have to put that in. I'm hoping. So no ash exemptions, we're keeping the no ashes. We're going to allow stage 1 waivers, but we are going to make them a little bit more, we're going to add more requirements. But we're also want to use them as incentives. So we're going to allow, EPA just wants annual waivers. If you're going to give one, just have 1 year. But we think if people make the choice to have newer stoves or to have a few hoops to jump through, then they should be rewarded by having longer waivers. So I can show you that table next if we have the time. But we're trying to leverage the use of the waivers to reward those who have newer devices that are getting their chimney sweeps to allow them to have longer waivers. However, the older devices, the really old devices, the high emitting devices that are like no ash, you'll get only 2 1-year waivers, and then you'll have to update your stove. So we are going to be using that to move to getting the really old devices out using the waiver process as well. And then because the way BACM reads, we have to look at all sectors. So it's not just home heating, it's small commercial, besides the large industrial, point sources. So other areas regulate char boilers, incinerators, and use oil burners. We don't have enough information on these, so we didn't want to just put a regulation out there so that was actually regulating them. So we do have a regulation that is proposed to require a one-time submission of information. The regulations list these out. So I'm going to pop over here and go show you what that list is. If we get the data, I mean, it's possible we could make changes to that regulation for public comment. So let's see if I can find it. Okay, so here we go. So for here, so you'd have commercial oil burners, owner name, facility, physical address, burner, purpose, number, type of burners, fuel type, fuel source, fuel quality, the rated capacity, hours of operation, emission limits, manufacturer, things like that. All the stuff you would need to actually make a decision on whether or not you need to do any kind of regulations and what their actual emissions are to see if they're negligible or not as a source. So the last one was the coffee roasters. We gotta, everybody's like, what in the hey? How can coffee roasters? North Pole Coffee Roaster already has it on. And there's also a BACM 67 for coffee roasters. We couldn't get the information, so we stated if they could show us that they're technically or economically infeasible, that we could waive this requirement. And we've put out the installation year to occur a full year after the effective date if they're needed more time. I think what's going to happen is at least the two we've already talked to out of the four, that we might be able to put a threshold in that would then, the little tiny ones wouldn't have to worry about this at all. So we're hoping that we'll get more information on this one, but we had to put it in. And then we have to have a contingency measure. So every plan has to have contingency measures, and it's very challenging to try to come up with a contingency measure that it doesn't meet BACM, because BACM is everything, right? You have to put everything in. So how do you come up with a contingency measure? Well, a contingency measure is something that's not been done anywhere. And for this particular instance, since we cannot meet attainment by 2029, this contingency measure will get turned on sometime next year on the effective date of EPA's finding of a failure to attain. So we had to find a contingency measure that we could live with as well, because you can put contingency measures in that if you don't think you'll ever get to them, you know, you may never turn them on. But a contingency measure has to be in regulation, and it has to be effective without any additional regulation change. This is a huge item for completeness, the completeness test. So we have one contingency measure that could be considered a most stringent measure. This would be to replace all old EPA certified devices. EPA started certifying devices in 1988, so that are older than 25 years and has an emission rater greater than 2.0. And what it is, this doesn't really quite say it, it's a rolling 25 years. So every year, a stove that was EPA certified that hits age over 22 and is greater than 2.0 would then be eligible to be required to be removed or replaced by 2024. And then after 24, if they're still those older EPAs, they would just be required to be taken out.
Cindy,
Again, yes.
Cindy, how is that going to be implemented?
Well, just like a lot of those other ones, and until we find you, you probably won't have to, but it'll be a requirement. So it's surprising how we actually find quite a few. And then people have to remind them that that's the requirement. And they'll have to work to remove it. But it's just one more regulatory requirement when, you know, when somebody is failing to meet visible emissions and, okay, they want a waiver, and then they have to be registered, and then you look at all this stuff, and it's like, well, we can give you a 1-year waiver, but your waiver you won't be able to renew it, or you only get 2 years renewed because you're failing to meet these other types of requirements. So there is that. So that's our contingency measure. More than happy to take comments or any other ideas people might have. Finding a contingency measure that's not in BACM is difficult. It's not something easy. I'm assuming I'm going to get more pushback from EPA for additional contingency measures. They're going to want us to try to quantify this. They're going to want us to come up with 1 full year reduction. That's in the preamble language, but it's not in the Clean Air Act, and it's not in the actual rule. So I'm going to push back on that one. So this is going to be a very interesting. This is a weakness of our SIP, is our contingency measure. I'll be frank about that. The rest of our SIP is weakness right now is going to be backed, because we're trying to be reasonable with backed, and hopefully the policy people will be supportive of that, because technically the technical people have already told us that what we're proposing doesn't meet backed. But this is our decision. The state has it's the state's prerogative to make the decision for backed, and that's what we've proposed. Does anybody have any major questions? I mean, about an hour, which is what I was told. I could go into all sorts of other things if you'd like to, or just open extra questions.
Mr. Soley?
So, Cindy, would you discuss briefly the transition from the plan that you're working on now, the draft plan, to the 5% plan, and the manner in which the EPA has to approve something, and to just help us understand that process a little bit, timeline, approvals,
Okay.
if you would.
Okay. So I think what would be the best thing to do is to get in and show you the slides real quick with what we did to Fairbanks. So you have something to look at instead of just me talking.
Let's say did in Fairbanks before the assembly instead of did to Fairbanks.
Okay, so 5% plan. So what happened is that the Clean Air Act and EPA regulations only give you two options for a serious SIP. You have to show attainment by 2019, or you have to request an extension. We can't show attainment by 2019. There isn't a way. Also, on our extension, we would have had to submit an extension and get EPA's approval of the extension before December 2019, which usually going to happen either, right? We paused the development of the SIP for the stakeholders, which was invaluable. And, we were running into problems, and EPA found a solution in the sense they did they re-looked at their, how they looked at the language of the rule. Another region had a different interpretation of the rule. Region 10 had been telling us that we had to do MSMs, period. Now, an MSMs are required for an extension request, but they were telling us regardless we had to do MSMs.
And MSM stands for?
Oh, I'm sorry, most stringent measure. So we don't think we're gonna get this into them and they're gonna approve it by December 2019. So therefore we have to do a 5% plan. The 5% plan is covered in section 189D of the Clean Air Act. This says if you fail to meet attainment, then you must submit a 5% plan within 1 year. So we know we're gonna have this December 2020 due date. Regardless of what EPA does, we'll turn a SIP in and they have almost 2 years to approve it. We're gonna get a 5% plan in before then. So did everybody track that? So the way the rule reads and the way the Clean Air Act reads is you get two options. You make attainment or you request an extension. We can't get an extension because EP can't approve the extension before we fail to meet attainment, right? Because what it is the extension is to move your attainment date out. So the attainment date is this year, and EPA can't approve an extension within the time frame that we have remaining. So we have to go to this 5%. Now there's some big advantages to a 5% plan. So all the regulations we proposed, if those all stay in or as adjusted or whatever, we can take credit, the emission reduction credit for those regulations in the 5% plan. And the diesel #1 switch can almost give us 3 years benefit just by itself. And you get to carry over. So you get a big reduction in 1 year. If it's over 5%, you get to carry over into the following years. Most stringent measures are not required, and that's including MSMs on point sources. That's huge. We feel that we can make the arguments at the policy level on our back, but there's no way we could have been successful with the bar for most stringent measures on the point sources. So when we were told that most stringent measures were off the table if we went to 5%, unless a measure we need to put on or we want to put on, but we get to have a choice of where we put that control measures on at that point. Most stringent measures are across the board. You have to put most stringent measures on all categories: home heating, commercial, industrial.
So I'm part of my confusion, I think, is in the connection of these two. Why would we want a serious SIP if we could have the 5% plan? I guess because one of your bullets here is that the positive impact on approvability of the serious SIP if the 5% plan can be approved. Well, the serious
Well-
SIP arguably has more serious measures than the 5% plan because it's showing incremental attainment over a
Right.
10-year period.
Well, the problem is we don't get you don't get to leapfrog over the serious. So
Okay.
the moderate plan is in place and it's active. And if you notice, we have a whole web page just the moderate SIP. We had to put a whole new serious SIP in, all new numbers, everything. Serious SIP was triggered when you become a serious area. Back and back them, you don't get to get out of back to back them. You have to do those. 5% plan is in addition to the other two plans. And we have the 5% effort. So you don't get to go moderate to 5% because back and back them are written in the Clean Air Act. You have to do those.
Okay.
So what we think might be a positive, and that's just our interpretation because we are, we got caught in the timing. You're supposed to have, years between SIPs, and our SIPs are practically overlapping each other. So, that's a hardship for us, but I think we've negotiated and we're trying to pull out all the advantages for having such a compressed overlapping schedule. And that is, it could be possible that EPA, they're going to get a serious SIP in the door, and then they're going to get this 5% plan in the door, and they're going to have some way of figuring out how they're going to deal with that. Well, they've never had to deal with that before. Nobody else has ever. We're groundbreaking. So it could be that they focus on the 5% plan and maybe or may not approve the serious SIP to a certain extent. They'll have to do some type of action on the serious SIP, but some of the 5%, I think it helps from a policy perspective. We can get the 5% in and we can make attainment and we can show that the point sources are not huge contributors and that we can show attainment, then it takes a lot of pressure off the back in a way. So this is we're hopeful, fingers crossed. And we see it as a possible positive. It's not for sure, but I personally, if we can cause consternation to EPA, yay. So I would love to give them 2 SIPs and see what they're going to do with it, because the 5% plan is going to show differences. So, like I said, it shows a little.
Cindy, the 5% plan is an actual plan that says we expect that this will result in that, or these are our plans to reduce it, right?
Yes.
What's the role of ESPs? Does the 5% plan allow us to get out of the whole conundrum we have about they're not? Well, what I'm wondering is if we put in ESPs and we drive down our emissions, then, and we can document it. That's the goal here, right? We can put in the 5% plan, what we think will get us to 5%. But if we implement a technology no one's done, which is how you get some of these other backums, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we drive ourselves down and show progress, what is the impact on that?
So
how does that help us hurt us with 5%?
So let me go in here real quick, and then I'll come back to your question. So the timeline is we would finish up this comment period, get the serious SIP in this winter, this early fall, late winter. Develop the 5% plan. I'm already started working on the 5% plan.
Okay.
We're hoping to release the 5% plan in a year, May 2020. Then over this course of this next winter, we're going to collect data, speciation data at the Hearst Road Monitor, because our current data is 2008 and it was for the State Office Building Monitor. So our model performance is really not very good in North Pole. And then we're going to update the 5% plan in around 2023, 2024 once we've updated the model. And the reason I want to tell you this timeline is to give you the whole big picture that, so we got this serious SIP to do, we got the moderate plan, we got to update the model, we got to update the 5% plan. What's going to happen with this 5% plan is we're going to have a new baseline year, probably 20 to 18, and we're going to be able to use a new design value. So the serious SIP is based on a 5-year modeling design value that's at 131 micrograms per cubic meter. The moderate SIP is going to be able to use the last 3 to 4 years, which are much lower. So our 5% reductions per year will be smaller, because what you do is you 5% of your emissions inventory, okay? It's not what you see on the monitor, it's on the emissions inventory. Then you have to do what you have to show reasonable further progress, and you have qualitative milestones you have to meet. And you start truing up monitoring values, what you model values. Okay, now back to your question. The difficulties with the ESPs are that we don't have the data to be able to justify or prove, and this is USA data, not European data and testing, but USA acceptable data from the EPA will accept it, that will show us to do 5% and show it that way, okay?
Right.
That's the conundrum we're in right now. But we're having, RFPs out for Fairbanks. Fairbanks has the RFP out to do testing. If we can't get it in to this 5% plan, we'll have to have results by this winter in order to go out for public comment in the spring. But we're going to have another one, and you can update your SIPs however many times you want to. But these are the ones we're going to do at a minimum. But that's the conundrum is it's a paper exercise, and it's for these plans. But at the same time, if you can get the emissions down on the monitors, then you're going to call less curtailments. You're going to show emission reductions. You're going to help health. You're going to help the residents. So we have this two-pronged issue. We have the paper exercise for provability, for EPA to accept, so they don't do sanctions, so they don't cause economic hardships from that perspective. And then you have what's on the ground, what's shown on your monitors, how you're actually affecting people. And ESPs, could very well be something that could be very beneficial to the community, but people want it paid for, but nobody's got any money. If state doesn't have any money, EPA's not going to let you have any money because they have strings attached on their money unless you have the data to show that it's working. And in the SIPs, they're not going to approve your SIP if you are what they might see as backsliding. So we're in a chicken and egg thing. It's possible, but we got to have data.
Okay, and just to clarify, if I might, you're talking essentially then that the 5% plan will be based on the 2019-2020 data from Hearst Road / State Building? No,
we can't get it done in time. So what happens that's why we want to do an update in 2023, 2024 with the new model. It takes
right.
You have to have a full season of collecting data, meteorology data, and your speciation data. Then that's going to have to be analyzed, and then you're going to have to pick episodes. So you have to pick representative episodes of when it's warmer and you have violations, and when it's really cold and you have violations, because what we have now is 2 episodes. We have to negotiate with EPA on the length of those episodes and on the days. That takes time. And then once you have those episodes and that data, then you have to start building the models. So what happens is we build what's called the weather WRF. I can't remember what it stands for. It's WFR. So you build the WRF model. The WRF moves into the CMAC model, which is the big model that's required to use. There's like 3 or 4 or 5 models actually that make up the model that's used. And each step of the way, you have to do performance requirements, and you have to have EPA approval. And they have to review the data, and then you do the next thing. You load it all up. It took us years to do the model originally, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources.
Yep.
And then once you get it calibrated and everything's looking good and whatnot, and then EPA buys off on it, then you can use it. And then you get, that's what I'm saying about this update. It's going to take about 2 years once we have the data to go through that process. Then we'll do an update, which means we get to use the new design values. We get to use new base year. We get to take advantage of all the emission reductions that are happening through the model. At that point in time, we'll have A Street up. And I mean, people have always asked me about splitting the area. That's possible. That might be possible at that point. Yes.
I don't know.
A Street?
A Street is, Hamilton Acres.
Oh.
So
I didn't know.
we tried to put a request in to split the area, and the EPA goes, well, if you split the area, you have to have a maximum impact site in the Fairbanks portion of it. And so state office building isn't representative enough. So we're working to put a monitor. We did put one in for part of the year, I believe, at Hamilton Acres to find a maximum representative site. It is reading a little higher than the state office building. And
That it is.
yeah, so we have to show all areas of the area means attainment. But if you want to split the area, we have to have a maximum impact site on both portions. And then if you show that those maximum impact sites are meeting attainment, then we could do that. But we're a few years from that. But I think if we have a new model and we get all this stuff in and things keep tracking like they are showing, I think we're going to be looking pretty good.
And where's the third monitor going? You said that we're breaking into three areas. So you've got one, Hamilton Acres, North Pole.
There isn't a model in Goldstream. There isn't a monitor in Goldstream. So if we broke the area, the Fairbanks portion would be Fairbanks and Goldstream together, and North Pole portion would be the North Pole.
So is it fair to say that if the emissions levels magically decrease, we can't explain why, there is some actual benefit to that happening?
Oh, absolutely. First, you're helping your citizens, and second, you use actual monitored data to set your design values that are the basis of your plan. Right, that are, are the basis for the plans, and how you have to, and what sets the stage for the models. So absolutely, your monitored values are critical. So anything you do to get your monitored values down is going to benefit you in your plans. Because where the rubber hits the road is the monitored values.
God, if we could just simplify the whole thing down to that, this would be so easy to do.
And then free up some of the money from the requirements or restrictions.
The rub is that this is so complicated to explain that everybody just throws up their hands.
I understand that.
Telling the money that we have right now is restricted to natural gas and wood stoves and no ESPs because we don't have data.
Yes.
Okay.
You have to. It's the thing where you have to spend money to show that something works, and then you'll get money. You know, I mean, that's what that's the chicken and the egg issue, and unfortunately, so that's you can always comment, and I think so. That was the that's the 5%. Rick, did I answer your questions on the 5%?
Yeah.
And yes, and then some.
Yeah.
What do you want to hear?
Oh, that was thank you.
But we're going to be up in Fairbanks again the week of, we're going to have an open house. We're going to have a presentation, probably something very similar to the assembly presentation, followed by an open house. So we'll have the tables and people can come talk to us. We're going to have these hearings. The commissioner is going to try to be there again for these, and we'll be having, I would say, contact his office if you want to meet with him again. We did about 20 meetings last week, so I think that if people want to have meetings next time we're up there, we're trying to utilize the travel we have. So we have travel restrictions. So we are going to come up for this. If you want to have a meeting, please contact the commissioner's office. And
no offense to the kindly commissioner, but you and Miss Edwards really know the skinny and the deep down. So really,
or us. You can contact.
That's right.
We'll set up meetings you can have with us.
Very much appreciated, Ms. Heil. Are there any further questions from the group? Okay, anyone, any further questions online? Mr. Newman? All right.
Yes, sir.
Well,
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Heil. Do you mind passing me back control?
Not at all. And anytime if you guys have more questions or, you know, individually you can, you saw the email link that you could send those formal questions where we can post them for everybody. And give a holler if you want to talk to us in person on around the 25th, 26th.
All right, very much appreciated. And by the way, it sounds like the final deadline for all of this information to be together is in mid-July?
It's July 26th.
July 26th.
No, all the 26s, so it's all consistent. July 26th.
Okay. All right, well, again, Ms. Heil, thank you so very much. All right, group.
Okay, bye-bye.
We'll go ahead and call this adjourned. Bye.
Thank you.